As some of you guys probably know, Atlus today is mostly known as the company that makes Persona, and Atlus USA, Atlus West now, is the company that translates it. But before Sega bought them, they were localizing all kinds of obscure games from other Japanese developers, games that, without them, we probably would have never seen. About half a year ago, I uploaded a video where I recommended to you guys some of the lesser-known games from Atlus, and you guys recommended to me so many more. So, naturally, another video like that had to be made at some point, because there are only so many games I can cover in one video. This is not the first, and it is definitely not going to be the last video on this subject that I make. So if there are any Atlus games you like that I happen to miss, be sure to let me know. But until then, enjoy the follow-up to my last video. Here are more obscure Atlus games you should check out. Let's start with a game from one of Atlus's very own franchises. Growlancer, Wayfarer of Time. Growlancer is another unfortunate case of a franchise being abandoned by Atlus due to it not being Persona 4 or 5, and therefore not being milkable. To be fair, it wasn't all that popular to begin with, and I could probably do a video on the entire series, but I feel like Wayfarer of Time is the one that gets overlooked the most. This is probably because it released in 2012 for the PSP, and it's not exactly the most technically impressive game on the system. I remember discovering this while browsing Persona and SMT videos on YouTube when I was a teenager. I saw the opening in my recommended section, and I thought, holy hot dang, this is freaking good. On top of it having an awesome opening with a banger soundtrack, the artwork for this series is great. It's done by Satoshi Urushihara, who also did, this is actually the only thing off the top of my head he did the art for. The story and setting for this game are kind of generic, but honestly, I still found the story quite interesting, and the characters are great too. On top of that, this game has several choices that affect the story in a number of ways, with it branching out into 3 possible endings. Now, the gameplay of Growlancer Wayfarer of Time is kinda hard to describe. It's like an in-between of real-time strategy and turn-based strategy, but either way, it's fun and quite challenging. When the battle starts, you choose your character's action, and then your character will proceed to do that action in real time. While he's doing this, if you change your mind, you can cancel your action and have him do something else, which you will be doing a lot of in this game. You really have to think about things like your character's position on the map and the startup and cooldown time of attacks. And of course, there's plenty of customization options to play with, many of which you can use to create combinations which you're probably going to need to do because of this game's difficulty. Oh, and there's also an optional relationship system. During your free time, you can hang out with characters and develop romances or bromances which will give you items or special abilities. Growlancer Wayfarer of Time is just an all-around very solid game with great gameplay, great characters, great art, and an interesting story. It's a shame that this had to be the franchise's swan song, but I guess that's what happens when you're an Atlus game that's not Persona 5. Although, Growlancer is kind of a spiritual successor to another franchise called Landgrisser, and that franchise is still going, but the less said about that, the better. Okay, so let me ask you guys something. What would you get if you put Spore and Minecraft in a blender? The answer would probably be something like this, but this game actually came before both. This game is Cubivore Survival of the Fittest, one of the most WTF games I have ever played. For many of you, the first time you probably ever saw or heard of this game was in Super Smash Bros. Melee as the trophy simply titled Alpha, which was listed as being from a future release. Cubivore is a game developed by Intelligent Systems, and was actually originally planned to be for the Nintendo 64 DD before being moved to the GameCube. It was published by Nintendo in Japan, but for some reason they never bothered with it in North America. I imagine that might have been due to the fact that it wasn't the most technically impressive GameCube game, and Nintendo maybe thought it wasn't up to par with their other first-party GameCube games. So it was instead left behind before being picked up by Atlus and releasing on November 5th, 2002. In Cubivore, you take on the role of this newborn piggy thing who decides that he wants to become king of all Cubivores. How does he do this? By devouring every other Cubivore that he sees. That's right, if the name didn't make it obvious, you progress in this game by eating other animals called Cubivores. Every time you do this, you mutate, which will give you a new power depending on what you ate. The combat is pretty simple. It only uses one button. You basically just pounce on enemies until they've taken enough damage for you to eat them, and hop out of the way when the enemies are about to pounce on you. You can block, but you still take damage, and this is just too unreliable. Levels are mostly linear, but there are certain things you have to do before you can progress in a level, like eating certain enemies to clear the pathway. There is also a mating mechanic, as described by my character right here. I got this incredible urge to go find some females, and to belly dance with them. Now that I've got a raw paw, I can sprint like a racehorse. By the way, I passed wind of good information. Passed wind? Caught wind? Anyway, I got a fat tip. This game got an E rating? So yeah, you go into these love house things where you'll mate with a number of females, and with them you create children who have more limbs, and after this you take control of one of these children. Well, I'm now playing as the child. I just hope my dad is still doing... Wait, what? Is my dad dead? You die after you mate? Man, this game is cruel. You know, to be perfectly honest, I'm not exactly sure why I like Cubivore so much. The graphics aren't impressive for the GameCube at all, and the gameplay is very simple. There are definitely better and more engaging games on the GameCube, ones that also don't have the outrageous price tag that this game does, but I feel like Cubivore has a lot of charm and personality that most games at the time, and even now, don't have. The concept is very creative, and the art style, the music, and the self-aware humor all come together for an experience that only this game can provide. I can't recommend this game for the price it normally goes for, but if you happen to stumble upon it for cheap at a garage sale or something, or if it ever gets a digital release, definitely give this game a shot. You just might be in for a good deal of enjoyment with it. Alright, so if you saw my last video, you might remember a game I talked about called Aquapazza, which was a 2D fighting game starring characters from Aquaplus, which is a company that makes adult visual novels. Well, that wasn't the only Aquaplus game Atlus would localize. Today, I'm going to be talking about another one, Dungeon Travelers 2, The Royal Library, and the Monster Seal. This game is a sequel to the Japan-only title 2 Heart 2 Dungeon Travelers, which is a spin-off of the harem visual novel / anime 2 Heart 2. Coincidentally enough, this game was developed by Sting, who also developed Baroque from my last video. Now, I don't think that many people watching this are familiar with 2 Heart 2, but thankfully, this game doesn't seem to require that. Actually, to my surprise, this game doesn't even focus on its story that much. Just like Baroque, you're thrown right into the gameplay with short cutscenes and minimal exposition, which is just how I like it. You take on the role of this tactician who can seal monsters. You command your party of moe waifus, and you all have one goal: to explore dungeons and kill every monster and mutant in sight. Now, Dungeon Travelers 2 at first may seem like the most cliched otaku pandering thing ever. The art is super generic and there's plenty of pointless fan service, but there's also plenty of self-parodying and witty dialogue, and you know, that's what I like about this game. It knows how ridiculous it is, and it never takes itself seriously. But what about the gameplay? Well, Dungeon Travelers 2 is a first-person dungeon crawler with turn-based combat. It doesn't really do anything all that revolutionary for the genre, but it does have loads of customization options you can mess around with. You can customize your character's skill growth, you can create seal books for monsters that give your party special abilities, and there are loads of different equipment which you can get by either buying from the shop or identifying from mystery equipment. But what Dungeon Travelers 2 gets right that so many other games in its genre get wrong is the pacing. So many first-person dungeon crawlers feel the need to have ridiculously confusing dungeons with frustratingly high encounter rates. But Dungeon Travelers 2 doesn't do this. The speed that you move through a dungeon is very fast, and the encounter rate is pretty low too, though there are ways to increase it if you want to grind. The same is true for the combat. Random encounters don't last long at all, and even the bosses go by pretty quickly. Oh, and in traditional Aquaplus fashion, the music is awesome. Although I do have a few complaints. The speed of the combat is at the cost of the battle animations. Half the moves in this game don't even have animations, and the ones that do only last about a split second and don't look impressive at all. Also, these enemy designs are ridiculous. This is another one of those things that takes pretty much every kind of monster and turns it into an anime girl. And this game also has one fatal flaw, one that's going to make this a deal breaker for some of you. This game is one of the few games that is still exclusive to the PS Vita. Yes, unlike most Vita exclusive games at the time which have by now been ported to PC, PS4, or Switch, this one has not. So unless you're one of the few people that owns either a PS Vita or a PS TV, you're gonna be out of luck. And unless this video gets like 1 million views, I wouldn't count on a port anytime soon, if ever. It's unfortunate, but if you do own a Vita and you're looking for some fast-paced dungeon crawling and turn-based action, you can hardly go wrong with Dungeon Travelers 2. So for the last game of this video, I'm going to talk about yet another game developed by Sting, Code of Princess for the Nintendo 3DS. This is another game that I discovered through Atlus's YouTube channel when it was coming out, and it looked cool, but I didn't have a 3DS at the time, so I passed on it. Fast forward to not too long ago, and I see it on the shelf at GameStop for just $10, so I decided to check it out. And I am really wishing I'd played this game sooner, because this game is awesome. Code of Princess has some of the most satisfying combat of any game of this type on the 3DS. Even though it falls under the category of action RPG, it's really more of a side-scrolling beat-em-up with RPG elements. Each level you choose to play as one of several characters, each of which have their own different fighting styles. Like most RPGs, you have different equipment you can put on and a leveling system where you can customize your stats. Now, as I mentioned, Code of Princess plays like a beat-em-up, but instead of constantly moving to the right and killing enemies, the stages function more like arenas. They all have 3 horizontal levels that you or your enemies can jump to and from to fight on. There really isn't much to say about the combat. You basically just keep attacking until the enemies are defeated. It's pretty simple, but really satisfying. You got all kinds of different combos you can pull off, and I don't know what it is about it, but landing combos and launching enemies into the air and whatnot in this game just feels really rewarding. Oh, and the music is freaking amazing. If the musical style sounds familiar, that's because it's done by Ace, who also did the soundtrack for Xenoblade Chronicles 1 and 2, and it is beautiful. It only makes the combat all the more enjoyable. Now, both the dialogue and voice acting for Code of Princess are hilariously bad, but it's in the same vein as Dungeon Travelers 2. This game doesn't try at any point to be serious. I mean, just look at these designs. You have a bard with an electric guitar, a gothic zombie necromancer, and then the design of the main character. The only major gripe I have with this game is that it is an early 3DS game, so it's not the best looking game on the platform, and it's also pretty short. It'll probably take you about 4 to 6 hours to beat. It's easy for me to recommend Code of Princess for the price I got it for, but that's only for the 3DS version, and this version is kind of hard to find. This game actually was ported to PC in 2016 and then ported to Switch in 2018, but the Switch version is still going for around $30, which I can't recommend for that price, and if the Steam reviews are anything to go by, it's not a good PC port either. Either way though, Code of Princess on the 3DS is a very fun game with enjoyable combat, god-tier music, and voice acting that's good for all the wrong reasons. And that concludes the video. As always, I hope you guys enjoyed, and be sure to rate, comment, and or subscribe if you haven't already. And tell me what some of your favorite underrated Atlus games are, because I would love to check them out, because I definitely want to keep doing more videos like this. If you haven't seen my first video yet, I do suggest you watch that one too. I'll have a link below in the description. I also want to give a huge shout out to my Ko-Fi supporters for this video. If you enjoy my content and want to support me, consider leaving a donation of just $3. I really appreciate it and it helps me out a lot. Lastly, I want to get a couple of announcements out of the way. Tokyo Mirage Sessions Encore just came out on the Switch, and a Twitter follower was kind enough to provide me with a copy. I do have plans to do a video on that game sometime soon, but I have to beat it first. And while it is still quite a ways away, I am planning to go to Anime Expo this year. Hopefully I'll be able to get a media pass, and I also have plans to do a panel there. Not sure if it'll get approved, but we'll have to see. Anyways guys, until the next video, I will see you all later.